Officer Dean Holloway grabbed Hannah Mercer by the arm in the middle of the hospital corridor, in front of patients, in front of staff, in front of everyone, and he smiled while he did it. Not the smile of a man doing his duty, the smile of a man who had already won. He yanked her forward, snapped the cuffs onto her wrists so tight she flinched, and leaned close to her ear. "Should have kept your mouth shut, sweetheart." And just like that, a trauma nurse with 9 years of service, a woman who had saved more lives than anyone in that building, was dragged out like a criminal. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a story like this. And drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning Hannah Mercer was arrested, she had already been awake for 19 hours. That was nothing new for her. Anna had a way of pushing through exhaustion that most people never develop, not from stubbornness, but from necessity. She had learned it in the field, long before she ever wore scrubs, long before she ever walked the halls of Ridgewood Falls Memorial Hospital. She had learned it crouched behind cover in places most Americans would never find on a map, with her hands working fast and her mind working faster, because stopping wasn't an option when someone's life was bleeding out in front of you. But on this particular Tuesday morning, the exhaustion wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that had been building for 9 months, pressing against the inside of her chest like a stone she couldn't put down. She stood at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, reviewing charts, keeping her movements routine, her expression neutral. She had gotten very good at neutral. It was a kind of armor she wore so naturally now that some of her colleagues thought she was cold. She wasn't cold. She was careful. There was a significant difference, and only Hannah understood exactly how much that difference had cost her. "You look terrible," said Marcus Webb, stepping up beside her with a coffee cup in each hand. Marcus was a charge nurse, mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of man who noticed things most people missed. He set one of the cups on the counter in front of her, and I mean that with complete professional respect. Hannah almost smiled. "I'm fine. You said that yesterday, and the day before." He lowered his voice, not dramatically, just enough. "You sleeping at all?" "I sleep." "How much?" She picked up the coffee. "Enough to function." Marcus watched her for a moment with that particular look he had, the one that meant he was deciding whether to push further or let it go. He let it go. He always let it go with Hannah, not because he didn't care, but because he had learned, over 2 years of working beside her, that pushing Hannah Mercer towards something she wasn't ready to say only made her retreat further. You had to wait for her. You had to give her space to come to you. What Marcus didn't know, what almost no one in Ridgewood Falls Memorial Hospital knew, was that the reason Hannah hadn't been sleeping had nothing to do with patient load or burnout or any of the usual reasons good nurses start to fray at the edges. It was because 3 nights ago, in a parking garage 4 blocks from the hospital, she had handed over a flash drive to an FBI contact named Agent Patricia Voss. And on that drive was 9 months of her life. 9 months of careful, dangerous, painstaking work. Documents, photographs, financial records, recorded conversations, everything she had gathered while keeping one face turned toward the hospital staff and another face turned toward the federal operation she had been embedded in since the previous spring. She had been recruited quietly, a conversation that started as a routine interview about a patient who had died under suspicious circumstances and turned into something else entirely when Agent Voss slid a folder across a table and said, "We think you've already noticed some of this. We think you've been noticing it for a while. We'd like to know if we're right." They were right. Hannah had been noticing for months. Small things at first, supply orders that didn't match inventory, medications that went missing in quantities too large to be casual theft, insurance billing codes that didn't align with the treatments she was actually administering. She had flagged it internally twice. Both times, the flags disappeared. No response, no follow-up, just silence from the administration and a subtle shift in how certain supervisors looked at her in hallways. By the time Agent Voss sat across from her, Hannah had already started keeping her own records. She just hadn't known yet what she was keeping them for. "You understand what you're agreeing to," Voss had said, not as a question. "This isn't a short assignment. It isn't clean. You will be living a double life inside a system that has very powerful people protecting it. If they suspect you, even once, the danger is real." Hannah had looked at the photographs in that folder, at the names attached to the numbers, at the scale of what had been happening, right there in the hospital where she worked, in the precinct she had trusted, in the offices she had walked past every day. "I understand," she said, and she had meant it. Right up until this morning, standing at the nurse's station with Marcus's coffee warming her hands and the weight of 9 months pressing against her ribs, she had meant every word. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it immediately. She finished reading the chart in her hand, set it down with the same unhurried motion she used for everything, and then glanced at the screen. Unknown number, 1 message, 3 words, wrap it up. Her pulse jumped once and then settled. She knew what that meant. They were close. Whatever she had handed over 3 nights ago had moved something, shifted something at the federal level. Wrap it up meant they were getting ready to act, and they were pulling her towards safety before they did. She texted back a single character, a period, confirmation received. She pocketed her phone, picked up her coffee, and turned to continue her rounds. That was when Dean Holloway walked in. She knew him by sight. Most people in Ridgewood Falls knew Dean Holloway by sight. He was the kind of officer who made himself visible. Broad shoulders, a walk that took up too much space, a habit of arriving places slightly louder than necessary. He had been with the Ridgewood Falls Police Department for 11 years, worked his way up to sergeant, and carried himself like a man who had decided a long time ago that authority was something you performed rather than something you earned. She had files on Dean Holloway. She had been building a file on Dean Holloway for 6 of the 9 months she had been working the case. He came through the double doors at the end of the corridor with 2 officers flanking him, and the moment his eyes found her, because she could feel the moment they found her, she felt it like a change in air pressure. She knew. They knew. Not everything. If they knew everything, this would have gone differently, but they knew enough. Someone had talked, or someone had noticed, or someone had gotten nervous and started asking questions in directions they shouldn't have been asking. And somehow a thread had been pulled, and it had led back to her. She kept her face completely still. She did not move toward an exit. She did not reach for her phone. She did not do any of the things that instinct was screaming at her to do, because doing any of them would confirm what Holloway suspected. And the only advantage she had left in this moment was letting him come to her on his own terms, letting him make the first move, letting him believe he was the one holding all the cards. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. "Hannah Mercer," he said, loud enough that heads turned all down the corridor, loud enough that it was a performance as much as an address. "You're under arrest." Marcus's voice came from somewhere behind her. "What? What is this? What is she being arrested for?" Holloway didn't look at Marcus. He kept his eyes on Hannah, and there was something in them, not just authority, not just aggression, something that looked almost like relief, like he had been waiting for this moment and was glad it had finally come. "Step away from the station, please," he said to Hannah. She set down her coffee, slowly, deliberately. She turned her wrists outward by instinct, the body language of non-resistance, of someone who had been trained to de-escalate in high-tension situations by demonstrating physical openness. She stepped away from the station. "On what charges?" she asked. Her voice was even. "Obstruction, theft of proprietary hospital records. We'll discuss the rest at the station." He moved around her, taking her arm, and that was when he did it. The move she had half expected and still felt like a slap. He pulled her arm back and cuffed her, right there in the middle of the 3rd-floor corridor, in front of nurses and orderlies, and a patient in a wheelchair who had stopped and was staring with her mouth open. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, stepping forward, his voice going sharp. "She hasn't done anything. Dean, you know her. She works here. What are you doing?" "Sir, back up," one of the flanking officers said. "I'm not backing up. I'm asking a legal question. On what charges are you?" "Marcus." Hannah's voice was quiet. He stopped. She turned her head just enough to look at him over her shoulder, and she held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second, but she put everything she could into it. Not fear, not distress, something calmer than that. Something that said, "I know what I'm doing. Don't fight this right now." Marcus's jaw tightened. His hands went to his sides. He stayed where he was. Holloway walked her toward the elevator. Behind her, she could hear the corridor breaking into noise. Whispered conversations erupting, someone on a phone, the clatter of dropped equipment as people turned to watch. She kept her eyes forward. She kept her breathing even. She counted her steps the way she used to count heartbeats in the field, when everything around her was chaos, and the only stable thing was the rhythm she created in her own body. In the elevator, one of the flanking officers leaned toward Holloway and said, low and private, "You sure about this timing? Captain said to wait for—" "I make the calls in the field," Holloway said. His jaw was set. "We wait any longer, she walks. This is the window." The officer said nothing else. Hannah stared at the elevator doors and registered every word. Holloway had moved without full authorization from above. He had acted on his own, which meant whoever was at the top of the structure she had spent 9 months mapping was not yet aware of what he had just done. That was information. Dangerous information, but information. They walked her through the hospital lobby, and the automatic doors slid open, and the early morning air hit her face, and she stepped outside into a parking lot where a cruiser was waiting, and Officer Dean Holloway, in front of bystanders, in front of a woman fumbling with her phone who was clearly filming, in front of a teenage boy on a bicycle who had stopped to watch, shoved her head down with one hand and pushed her into the back seat. From the back of the cruiser, through the window, Hannah watched the hospital entrance shrink behind her. She allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of pure, unfiltered fear. She counted them out, 1 through 10. She let the fear move through her, felt its full weight, the cold of it, the way it pressed against her throat and made her hands want to shake. At 10, she exhaled. Then she started thinking. The charges Holloway had cited, obstruction, theft of records, were surface charges, constructed charges. They were designed to hold her long enough for something else to happen, and that something else was almost certainly not legal. Getting her into custody got her away from her federal contacts. It put her in a building controlled by people she had spent 9 months documenting. It stripped her of her phone, her access, her ability to communicate. It was not an arrest, it was a capture. But here was the thing Holloway didn't know. Here was the thing none of them knew, sitting in that precinct, processing paperwork and thinking they had solved their problem. Every federal witness embedded in an active operation has a protocol, a check-in protocol, a failure to check-in protocol. Hannah had checked in last at 11:40 the previous night. Her next scheduled check-in was at 6 a.m. If she missed that check-in without prior notice, Agent Voss would initiate a wellness trace. The wellness trace would return Hannah's location as Ridgewood Falls Police Department. And at that point, the protocol changed entirely. It was 4:52 in the morning when they brought her through the precinct doors. She had exactly 68 minutes before the wellness trace began. They put her in a processing room, not a cell yet, a room with a metal table and 2 chairs, and a mirror along one wall that was not really a mirror. She sat down across from the table, crossed her hands in her lap, and waited. The door opened after about 15 minutes, and a man she recognized walked in. Not an officer. He was wearing civilian clothes, a collared shirt, dark pants, and he had a legal pad in one hand and an expression that was meant to communicate calm professionalism, but communicated instead a kind of suppressed anxiety that Hannah had learned to read in 9 months of watching people who had things to hide. His name was Gary Pressler. He was the chief legal counsel for Ridgewood Falls Memorial Hospital. He also appeared in her files 47 times. "Hannah," he said, like they were old colleagues, "I'm sorry about all of this. I really am. There's been a misunderstanding, and I want to clear it up as quickly as possible." "What misunderstanding?" she said. "About the records, about what you accessed and why." He sat down across from her, set the legal pad on the table, laced his fingers together. "Now, we know you were accessing financial files that weren't part of your nursing duties. We know you made copies. We're not here to make a federal case out of this." He smiled briefly at his own phrasing, seemingly unaware of the irony. "We just need to understand why, what you were looking for, and whether you shared what you found with anyone outside the hospital." Hannah looked at him steadily. "I'd like to speak to an attorney before I answer any questions." His expression didn't change, but his hands tightened slightly against each other. "Of course, that's your right. But Hannah, I want to be honest with you. The attorney the department assigns at this hour is going to take hours to get here. And in the meantime, this sits on your record. The arrest, the charges. Your nursing license is at risk. Everything you've worked for. If we can just clear this up now, between us, we can have you out of here by sunrise. No record, no review board. Clean." She looked at him for a long moment. She let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, and then she said, very quietly, "Are you recording this conversation?" His jaw moved. "I'm sorry? This room, is it recording right now?" "That's not. This is a legal consultation. There's no—" "Mr. Pressler," she said, and her voice was so steady it seemed to stop him mid-sentence. "I've invoked my right to counsel. This conversation is over until an attorney is present. Anything further you say to me, I will consider coercive. Do you understand?" He stared at her. The suppressed anxiety behind his professional mask cracked just slightly, enough for her to see it, enough for her to know that she had just told him something he didn't expect to hear. He had expected her to be frightened. He had expected the threat of her nursing license and her record to rattle her into talking, into making concessions, into revealing what she had and hadn't shared. He had not expected her to hold the line like someone who already knew exactly what was coming. He stood up, picked up his legal pad, walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at her. "You should think carefully," he said, "about who your friends are in this situation." "I'm thinking," Hannah said, "about exactly that." He left. The room went quiet again. Hannah sat in the silence and let her mind work. She calculated time. It was approximately 5:15, 45 minutes to the wellness trace. She was in a processing room, not a cell, which meant the formal booking hadn't happened yet, which meant the paper trail was incomplete, which meant Holloway had moved fast and sloppy, and the institutional cover he needed from people like Pressler wasn't fully assembled yet. They were improvising. Experienced criminals improvising under pressure made mistakes. The door opened again. This time it was Holloway. He came in without the performance he had used in the hospital corridor. In here, with no audience, he was different. Quieter. More dangerous in the way that a confined space is more dangerous than an open one. He pulled out the other chair and sat down and leaned his forearms on the table and looked at her like he was genuinely trying to figure something out. "Let me ask you something," he said, "and I'm asking you straight, no games. What exactly do you think is going to happen here?" "I think," she said, "that I'm going to wait for my attorney." "Your attorney?" He nodded slowly, like he was turning the word over. "Right, because you know your rights, because you're very calm for someone who just got arrested at 5 in the morning. He tilted his head. "Most people aren't this calm. Most people haven't worked trauma for 9 years. Is that what it is?" He was quiet for a moment. "Or is it something else? Is it maybe that you know something we don't? That you've got some kind of plan here, some kind of, I don't know, backup. He said the word casually, but his eyes were sharp on her face. Some kind of people waiting for a call that isn't coming. Hannah held his gaze and said nothing. He sat back, crossed his arms. The performance was gone completely now, and what was left was something raw. A man who had taken a significant risk by making this arrest and was just starting, to wonder if he had miscalculated. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you're smart. I think you're a lot smarter than anyone in that hospital gave you credit for. And I think you're sitting there right now thinking you're going to wait us out, that something's going to happen." He leaned forward again, dropping his voice. "Nothing is going to happen, Hannah. I want you to understand that. No one is coming for you. You are in our building, in our system. Whatever you thought you had, we have now. And whatever you thought you were going to do, that's over." The clock on the wall behind him read 5:22, 38 minutes. She looked at him and she thought about the flash drive she had handed to Agent Voss 3 nights ago. She thought about the 9 months of evidence, all of it now in federal hands, all of it already processed and organized and building towards something that could not be stopped by arresting one nurse in a third-floor corridor. She thought about the protocol, the check-in, the trace, and she said, very calmly, with no anger and no defiance, just a simple and complete honesty, "I think you should prepare yourself, Sergeant Holloway, because whatever you think you have, you don't have it." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." He stood up so fast the chair scraped back on the floor. He pointed one finger at her, and his composure, that last layer of it, cracked open, and she could see the fear underneath, real and cold, and suddenly very present. "You're going to want to start talking," he said, "right now, before this gets worse for you." "I've invoked my right to counsel," Hannah said. "This conversation is over." He left. She sat alone in the quiet room. The clock read 5:26. She put her hands flat on the table in front of her, steady, both of them, not a tremor. And she breathed, and she waited. And somewhere across the city, in a federal field office that Dean Holloway and Gary Pressler and every person in their network had no idea existed, a timer was counting down toward a moment that none of them were ready for. 34 minutes. Outside the door, she heard the sound of voices rising. Someone had found something, or learned something, or the background check that every arrested person triggered automatically had run its course and returned a result that nobody in that building had anticipated. She heard Holloway's voice, sharp and sudden, and then another voice she didn't recognize, and then silence, and then footsteps moving fast. 33 minutes. But the precinct was no longer quiet. The voices outside the door were getting louder. Hannah could hear the shift happening, not just in volume, but in quality. The way a crowd noise changes when it stops being noise and becomes something with a direction, something with an edge. She had heard that sound before, in places where everything could tip in a second, and she recognized it the way you recognize a weather change in your bones before the sky shows it. Someone in that precinct had just seen the background check results. The clock on the wall read 5:29, 31 minutes to the wellness trace. She kept her hands flat on the table. She kept her breathing measured. She did not move toward the door or away from it. She just sat, and she listened, and she let the building come apart around her on its own. The first voice she could clearly make out was not Holloway's. It was higher, tighter, the voice of a man whose control was slipping faster than he could manage. "That cannot be right. Run it again." A pause. Then, "I said run it again." A second voice, lower, more careful. "Sir, it ran 3 times. It's the same result every time." Silence. And then, "Where is Holloway?" "He was just in with her. He should be. Get him, right now. Do not let anyone in or out of that room." The footsteps that followed were fast, running fast. Hannah tracked them down the corridor by sound, measured the distance, calculated how long before whoever was coming reached the door of this room. 20 seconds, give or take. The door opened. It was not Holloway. It was a man she had never seen inside the precinct before. 50s, silver-haired, in a suit that was too expensive for this time of morning, which meant he hadn't just driven from home. He had been nearby, possibly in the building, which meant he had known this arrest was happening before it happened, which elevated him immediately above Holloway in the structure she had been mapping. She filed that away in the part of her brain that never stopped working. He looked at her the way men like him always looked at people like her, like he was calculating something, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be addressed. He sat down across from her without introducing himself and placed both hands on the table and said, "I want to know what you have." "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't do that. Don't play the confused nurse. We're past that." He kept his voice low and even, but there was something underneath it, a vibration, the frequency of a man who was genuinely frightened, trying to project the opposite. "I want to know what you accessed, what you copied, and who you gave it to." "I've invoked my right to counsel," Hannah said. "I won't be answering questions without an attorney present." He leaned forward. "There is no attorney coming for you. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The man we would have called in a situation like this, he's already been informed that this is a sensitive matter. He will not be rushing to your side." He said it like he expected it to land hard, like that particular piece of information was meant to be the thing that finally cracked her open. It landed, but not the way he intended, because what he had just told her, without knowing he had told her, was that they were interfering with her access to counsel, which was a federal violation on top of every other federal violation that had already accumulated against them in the last 45 minutes. He had just handed her another brick in the wall that was going to fall on all of them. She looked at him and said nothing, just looked. His jaw tightened. "You are a very stubborn woman." "I'm a woman who knows her rights," she said. He stood up, walked to the door, then stopped with his back to her and said, quietly, almost to himself, "You have no idea how deep this goes." "I might," Hannah said. He turned to look at her over his shoulder. Something moved through his face that wasn't anger and wasn't calculation. It was something older and colder than either of those things. He left without another word. 27 minutes. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Hannah's life, and she had lived through things that should have made 20 minutes feel like nothing. She had sat with dying soldiers in conditions that would have broken most people. She had held the line through things that didn't have clean names in civilian language. But those moments had external action to focus on. They had tasks. They had something to do with her hands, with her training, with her body. This was different. This was waiting in a metal chair in a quiet room while the building outside reorganized itself around the threat she represented. And the only thing she could do was stay still and let it happen. She heard Holloway's voice at one point, raised, arguing with someone she couldn't identify. "I had authorization. You said if the window opened," and then the other voice cutting him off, sharp and absolute. "I said conditional authorization, Dean. Conditional. Not a green light to drag a federal witness through a hospital lobby at 5 in the morning." A pause. Then Holloway again, lower. "She's not. The file doesn't say." And then the silver-haired man, because she recognized his voice now. "The file says exactly what it says. And if you'd run the check before you put the cuffs on her, we wouldn't be standing here having this conversation." Hannah closed her eyes, breathed, opened them again. Holloway had not run the background check before the arrest. He had moved on instinct and partial information, and the particular arrogance of a man who had always gotten away with moving fast and asking questions later. And now the system he trusted, the web of people and favors and carefully maintained corruption that had made him untouchable for 11 years, was turning on him in real time, trying to separate itself from what he had done, trying to create enough distance to survive what was coming. They didn't know yet what was coming, but they could feel it, the way animals feel a storm before the sky changes. 5:41. 19 minutes. The door opened again, and this time it was a young officer. Couldn't have been more than 25, probably desk duty, sent by someone who didn't want to come themselves. And he was carrying a cup of water, which he set on the table in front of her, without making eye contact. And he said, "Can I get you anything?" In the voice of a person who has been told to ask a question they are deeply uncomfortable asking. "Yes," Hannah said. "I'd like to be released, as I've been held without completed booking for over 40 minutes, and I haven't been informed of formal charges." He blinked. I'll let someone know." "Please do." He left. She didn't expect anything to come of it, but she wanted it in the room, in whatever record existed of this interaction. She wanted the paper trail to show that she had asked, clearly and calmly, at every reasonable interval. 5:47, 13 minutes. It was the silver-haired man who came back. He came alone this time. No performance, no legal pad, no pretense of official process. He sat down across from her, and he looked at her for a long time before he spoke. And when he spoke, his voice had changed in a way that was more unsettling than all his previous authority combined. It had gone quiet, reflective almost. "You're not going to talk to me," he said. "I know that now. I want you to know that I understand it. You're trained, you're disciplined, and honestly," he seemed to consider the word, "I respect it." He folded his hands. "But I need you to think about something. Think about the people in your life, people who care about you. Because whatever happens in the next few hours, there are people around you who could be affected by how this plays out." Hannah felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was a threat, cloaked in reasonable language, delivered in a quiet voice, but a threat. And it was the first moment in the entire morning where she felt something that was not calculation, not protocol, not trained calm. It was something more basic than that. It was the thing underneath all the training. It was the part of her that was not a federal witness or a combat medic or a woman who had chosen to spend 9 months living a double life. It was just her. And it was afraid for the people she loved. She thought of Marcus, standing in the corridor with his coffee cup, his jaw tight, his hands at his sides, watching them take her away. She kept her face still. "That sounds like a threat," she said. "It sounds like a statement of fact," he said. "If anything happens to anyone connected to me," she said, and her voice was quieter now, lower, carrying a weight that had not been there in the previous conversations. "It will not go the way you think it will. I promise you that." He studied her. "You're very certain about that." "I am." He stood, walked to the door, paused. "Holloway acted alone this morning. I want you to remember that. When you tell your story, whatever version of it you decide to tell, I want you to remember that what happened in that hospital corridor was one officer acting outside his authority. It has nothing to do with anyone else in this building." He was already distancing, already constructing the narrative that would separate him from Holloway, that would make Dean Holloway the single bad actor in a system full of good ones. Anna had watched this happen in files and financial records for 9 months, and now she was watching it happen in real time in a room she was locked in. And the clarity of it, the absolute confirming clarity of watching exactly what she had documented begin to perform itself in front of her, steadied something inside her that even the threat to Marcus had shaken. She said nothing. He left. 5:58, 2 minutes. She heard it before she understood it. A change in the ambient noise of the building, a shift in the frequency of voices and movement. Someone had received a communication from outside the building. She could tell because the response to it was not contained. It spread, the way a sound spreads in water, from a point and outward, person to person, the reaction of each one feeding into the reaction of the others. 6:01. The wellness trace had initiated. She knew it the way she knew it. Not because anything visible had changed, but because the noise outside the door sharpened into something that had the specific character of reactive panic rather than controlled tension. There is a difference between people who are scared and people who have just realized that scared is not adequate for what they are facing. The door opened so fast she barely had time to register it before Holloway was inside the room. And he was not the Holloway from the hospital corridor, and he was not the Holloway from their last conversation. Every layer was gone. He was just a man who had finally understood the size of what he had stepped into. "Who are you working with?" he said. His voice was almost steady. Almost. "Federal. Which agency?" Hannah looked at him. "Tell me." He came forward, both hands on the table, leaning in. "Tell me right now. Give me a name. Tell me who you've been feeding information to, and maybe, we can get ahead of this before." "Before what?" she said. He went still. "Before what, Dean?" She held his gaze and she let the question sit between them because she wanted him to hear it. She wanted him to hear the answer that was already forming in both their minds. Before the federal agents you can't stop come through that door. Before the system you thought was protecting you turns you into the sacrifice. Before every name in my files becomes a name in an indictment. He straightened up slowly. He ran his hand over his face. For a moment, just a moment, he looked not like a corrupt sergeant and not like the man who had grabbed her arm in a hospital corridor and smiled while he did it. He looked like someone who had made a series of choices over a long period of time and was only now, standing in a small room at 6 in the morning, beginning to understand the total weight of what those choices had accumulated into. "You should have stayed out of it," he said. His voice had gone flat. "I couldn't," she said. He shook his head, walked to the door. "For what it's worth," he said with his back to her, "I didn't think it would go this far." "It always goes this far," Hannah said. "It just takes time." He left. And then everything happened at once. The sound came first. Rotors, distant but getting less distant by the second. The particular low thrum of federal helicopters which Hannah had heard many times before under very different circumstances. Then voices in the precinct spiking, multiple people talking over each other. Someone shouting for the desk sergeant, someone else shouting for Holloway, someone on a radio getting a response that made them go silent in the specific way people go silent when the thing they feared most has been confirmed. Then a voice she actually recognized. She recognized it because she had heard it across a table in a government building on the day she agreed to become part of this operation. Professional, controlled, carrying that particular authority that comes not from rank alone, but from the absolute conviction that the person speaking it has the backing of something that cannot be outrun. Agent Patricia Voss. In the corridor, outside this door. Federal witness. This building is now subject to federal jurisdiction. I need everyone to stand down and stay where they are. Hannah pressed both palms flat against the table and breathed. She heard Holloway's voice, somewhere further away, trying one last time. "You have no authority to..." "Sergeant." Voss's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I have a federal warrant. I have a wellness violation on an active protected witness, and I have 17 agents standing outside this building. I suggest you reconsider the sentence you were about to finish." Silence. A long silence. And then footsteps down the corridor. Unhurried, deliberate. The sound of a door handle. The door of Hannah's room swung open, and Patricia Voss stood in the frame and looked at her the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely relieved to see alive. "You good?" Voss said. "I'm good," Hannah said. "We need to move." Hannah stood up. Her legs were solid under her. She smoothed her scrubs with both hands, a small, automatic gesture, the thing her hands needed to do in the absence of anything more useful, and she walked toward the door. Behind her, through the windows that lined the corridor, she could see the lights. Blue and red from law enforcement vehicles, white bright from the helicopter searchlights raking the parking lot, and somewhere in the moving shapes of it all, the silhouettes of federal agents positioning themselves with the precision of people who had been planning this for a long time. In the processing room 2 doors down, she caught a glimpse through the small glass window. The silver-haired man, standing, his phone in his hand, the expression on his face so far past fear that it had gone somewhere quieter and more devastated. Like a man watching something he spent years building simply stop existing. Holloway was at the far end of the corridor, surrounded by 3 agents she didn't recognize, his hands at his sides, his head slightly down. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't performing. Whatever he had been for the last 11 years, he wasn't being it anymore. Voss put a hand briefly on Hannah's arm as they moved. Not guiding, not checking, just the contact of one person acknowledging another person's presence in a moment that required more than words could carry. "How many are in the building?" Hannah asked. 14 so far. We have more at the hospital, City Hall, and 2 private residences. This is the first wave." Voss kept moving. "The full operation goes in at 3:17. "How long is that from now?" Voss glanced at her. "About 9 hours." Hannah processed that. 9 hours. 9 hours from now, the thing she had been building toward for 9 months would be fully in motion. Raids, seizures, arrests. The entire structure, the hospital billing, the insurance fraud, the supply theft, the money laundering, the protection network that had allowed all of it to operate for years in a mid-sized American city while people were harmed and silenced and intimidated. All of it moving toward a moment of full collapse. She stepped out of the precinct doors and the early morning air hit her again, the same way it had hit her going in, except that this time she was not in cuffs, and this time the cruiser waiting in the lot was not the one meant to contain her. She stopped on the steps, just for a second, just long enough to let the air be what it was, cold and real and outside, and to let the noise of the operation unfold around her without being inside it, just for that one breath. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" "Everything," Voss said. "We have the drive. But you were in that room with them. You heard things tonight that aren't on any drive." "The silver-haired man," Hannah said. "Who is he?" Voss looked at her steadily. "Congressman Ellis Garner. He sits on the Judiciary Committee." The size of it settled over Hannah like something physical. A congressman, not a city official, not a police captain. A sitting congressman on the Judiciary Committee in a precinct building before 6 in the morning, threatening a federal witness while his people tried to strip her of legal counsel. "He was here before the arrest," she said. "He had to be. He was too composed when he walked in. He already knew the situation." "We know," Voss said. "That's been confirmed. That's why this moves tonight." Hannah nodded once, and then they walked together toward the federal vehicles in the cold light in the next 9 hours. And somewhere behind her, through the windows of the Ridgewood Falls Police Department, the building that had spent the last hour trying to break her was already, quietly, irreversibly beginning to come apart. 9 hours felt like nothing. 9 hours also felt like everything. Hannah sat in the back of a federal vehicle with a thermal blanket around her shoulders that she didn't remember accepting, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hands, while Agent Voss walked her through what the next phase looked like. Outside, the precinct was being processed. 14 people detained, evidence bags moving in and out of the building in a steady procession that looked, from the outside, like something organized and inevitable, which it was. It had been organized for months. It just hadn't looked inevitable until tonight. "We're moving you to the field office," Voss said. "Debrief, medical check, then we'll need your verbal account of everything that happened inside that building tonight. Every word, every person, every sequence." "Garner's attorney is going to move fast," Hannah said. "He already has. We have 3 calls logged to a private firm in D.C. in the last 40 minutes. They're working on an emergency injunction." Hannah looked at her. "Can they get one?" "Not in time," Voss said. Not with what's on that drive. 7:53 a.m. The field office was 40 minutes east of Ridgewood Falls, in a building that looked like an insurance company from the outside and felt, on the inside, like a place where the gravity worked slightly differently. Heavier, more deliberate. Every surface and hallway calibrated toward the weight of serious things. Anna had been here twice before, both times for operational check-ins that lasted less than an hour. This time she walked in knowing she wasn't leaving for a while. A woman she hadn't met, young, efficient, the kind of focus that came from being good at something under pressure, walked her through a medical assessment in a side room while Voss coordinated outside. Blood pressure, pulse, the kind of quick physical inventory that said, "We need to know you're functioning before we need you to function." "Any injuries from the arrest?" the woman asked. Hannah thought of Holloway's grip on her arm, the cuff going on too tight. She rotated her wrist. "Nothing significant." The woman noted something, looked up. "You were in custody for approximately 74 minutes before extraction. That's documented." "Good," Hannah said, because it was good. Every minute was documented, every violation, every conversation she had been dragged through in that room. It was all part of the record now. 8:21 a.m. The debrief room was small and clean and had a recorder on the table and two agents she had not worked with before, a man named Caldwell and a woman named Torres, who sat across from her with legal pads and the particular attentiveness of people who understood they were recording something that would matter in a federal courtroom. "Start from the hospital," Caldwell said, "the moment Holloway made contact." She started. She went through it methodically, not from memory alone, but from the part of her that had been cataloging every moment in real time as it happened. The part that had never stopped being operational, even when she was sitting in a metal chair in a processing room, counting down minutes. She described Holloway's grip, the corridor, Marcus's voice, the elevator, the arrival at the precinct. She described Pressler entering the room in the exact language he had used. She described the silver-haired man, Congressman Garner, and the words he had said, in the order he had said them, including the threat. When she got to the threat, Caldwell's pen stopped moving. He and Torres exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but communicated something complete. "Say that again," Torres said. "The exact wording." Hannah repeated it, word for word, because she had a memory that had been trained for exactly this kind of retention, and because the moment he had said it, she had committed it to something deeper than short-term recall. Torres wrote. Caldwell looked at his legal pad. Then he said carefully, "Ms. Mercer, in your assessment, was that statement a direct threat to specific individuals or a general statement of pressure?" "It was specific," Hannah said. "He referenced people in my life, people who care about me. He used that language deliberately. He wanted me to think about particular people." "Do you have specific people in mind who could be at risk?" She thought of Marcus again. She thought of her sister in Portland who didn't know any of this was happening. She thought of the 3 other nurses she had worked alongside for 2 years who had no involvement and no knowledge. "I have a colleague at the hospital," she said. "Marcus Webb. He witnessed the arrest. He was vocal about it. If they're looking for pressure points, we'll have someone at the hospital within the hour," Torres said. She didn't write it down. She said it to Caldwell, who nodded once, and that was enough. It was the kind of efficiency that had nothing to do with paperwork and everything to do with actual action, which was the only kind Hannah had ever respected. 8:59 a.m. She had been talking for almost 40 minutes when Voss came back into the room. She didn't interrupt, but she put a folded piece of paper on the table in front of Caldwell, and Caldwell read it, and the quality of his stillness changed. Not visibly to most people, but visibly to Hannah. "Take 5, he said to Torres. To Hannah, "We'll pick up where we left off." They left. Anna sat alone in the room, with the recorder still running and the sound of the building moving around her. Phones, footsteps, the low frequency of multiple things happening simultaneously in adjacent spaces. And she waited. Voss came back alone. She sat down across from Hannah, and she put her hands on the table, and she said, "Something's come up. I need to prepare you." Hannah went still. "What?" "The drive." Voss kept her voice level, but there was something underneath it, a careful steadiness that Hannah recognized as the way you deliver news you know will hit hard. "The drive you handed me 3 nights ago. We've been working through the encrypted files. There are things on there that go beyond what we briefed you on. Well beyond." "How far beyond?" "The insurance fraud, the supply theft, the local network, that's all there, clean and complete. But there's a secondary layer, financial flows we didn't anticipate. The money leaving this system isn't just going to private accounts." She paused. "It's being distributed across 7 cities, 3 states. Hannah absorbed that. This isn't a local operation. It never was. Ridgewood Falls was a node, one node in a larger network. Garner isn't just the protector of the local end. He's a structural element of the whole thing. His Judiciary Committee position gave him access to oversight bodies that should have been catching this. He's been running interference at the federal level for at least 4 years. The size of it shifted in Hannah's mind. She had spent 9 months building a case she thought had a definable boundary. A corrupt town, a corrupt precinct, a corrupt hospital administration. And that was all real. But it was also a piece of something larger that she had been sitting inside without knowing the full dimensions. "How many people?" she asked. "Right now? Active targets across all locations?" Voss looked at her steadily. 61, maybe more. The operation tonight is coordinated across 4 field offices. Ridgewood Falls is one of 7 simultaneous raid sites. 9:22 a.m. Hannah sat with that number for a moment. 61 people, 7 cities, 4 years. And at the center of it, a congressman who had been on the Judiciary Committee, the body designed to provide oversight of the very systems he had been corrupting. She thought about the files she had collected, the billing irregularities she had flagged and watched disappear, the medications that went missing, the patients who had filed complaints that went nowhere. She thought about all of it as a fraction of something larger than she had understood, and something moved through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the space between them. "The people who were harmed here," she said, "in Ridgewood Falls alone, the patients, the staff, the people who filed complaints and got silenced, they're all in the record," Voss said. "Every one of them." "That's not what I'm asking." Voss looked at her. "I'm asking if they'll be made whole. If the people who were hurt, not arrested, not exposed, just hurt, people who lost things because of what this network did, if they're going to see something real come out of this. Not a press conference, something real." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can't promise you outcomes, Hannah. You know that. What I can tell you is that the case we have, what you built, gives prosecutors more than they've ever had in a case like this. What they do with it is their decision." It wasn't the answer Hannah wanted. It was the honest answer, which was the one she had always preferred, even when it cost her. "Okay," she said, "let's keep going." 10:47 a.m. The debrief ran for 3 more hours. By the end of it, her throat was dry, and her hands were cold, and she had given Caldwell and Torres a verbal account that covered 9 months of her life in the kind of detail that made it real, in a way that written files never quite achieved. Files had facts. What she had given them was context, the texture of it, the way people's voices changed when they were performing safety and when they were genuinely threatened. The micro moments she had cataloged and held onto and carried through every check-in and every double shift and every sleepless night. When Caldwell finally closed his legal pad, he looked at her with an expression she hadn't expected from him. "For the record," he said, "what you documented in 9 months is more than most embedded operatives produce in twice that time. The organization and detail of the evidence on that drive it's exceptional work. Hannah nodded. She didn't say thank you because it wasn't a compliment she knew how to receive. It was a fact. She had done the work because the work needed doing and because she had been the one in a position to do it. One thing, she said, the drive, is it secure? 5 copies, 3 locations, 1 already filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Good. She stood up. Her body reminded her she had been awake for nearly 28 hours. She pushed that information to the back of her mind and filed it under things to address later. 11:15 a.m. Voss was waiting in the corridor with her phone in her hand and an expression that shifted when she saw Hannah coming. Not good news, not catastrophic news, something in the middle, which was often the most complicated kind. Media, Voss said. Someone at the precinct talked. We don't know who yet. There's a story running on a local station. Early version, incomplete, but it has your name. It's identifying you as a nurse arrested for stealing hospital records. Hannah stopped walking. No mention of the federal operation? Not yet, but the framing is... Voss paused, choosing the word, unfavorable. Hannah knew what that meant. It meant that whoever had leaked strategically, not to expose the corruption, to get ahead of the narrative, to establish the version of events where Hannah Mercer was the problem. A disgruntled employee, an unstable woman who stole records and got arrested. Get that story out first. Get it attached to her name before the truth could take hold. And even when the truth came out, it would have to fight against the first version. It was a move she had seen in her files. It was how the network had handled other people who had gotten too close. Not with direct violence, with narrative. Reputation as a weapon. How big is the reach, she asked. Local right now, but these things travel. Then we need the real story moving faster than the false one. Voss nodded. That's already being coordinated. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing a statement. It goes out simultaneous with the operation tonight. She looked at Hannah carefully. There's a question about whether you want to be part of that statement, whether you want your role named publicly. It was not a small question. Hannah understood exactly how not small it was. Public identification as a federal operative meant losing the last layer of privacy that had protected her for 9 months. It meant her face, her name, her story becoming something that lived in the public record permanently. It meant people who were connected to the network and not yet arrested, knowing exactly who had brought it down. Against that, the story that was already running, the story that called her unstable, that called her a thief, that was being handed to a public audience right now by people who wanted it to be what people remembered. Let me think about it, she said. You have until 8 tonight, Voss said, 12:33 p.m. They put her in a private room with a cot and told her to sleep. She lay down and stared at the ceiling for a while and let her mind run through everything the way it always did when she was too tired to direct it. The sequence of the night, Holloway's face at the end, empty and diminished. Pressler with his legal pad. Garner, who had threatened her in quiet language and looked at her like a problem, who was now sitting in federal custody in a building that had processed him and stripped him of his suit jacket and his phone. She thought about 61 names in files across 7 cities. She thought about the billing code she had first noticed 14 months ago. A number slightly wrong on an insurance claim for a patient she had just treated. A number so small and so specific that most people would have scrolled past it. She had not scrolled past it. She slept for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Not enough. Enough. 3:17 p.m. She was awake and sitting at a table with Voss when her phone, returned to her now, fully charged, lit up with Marcus Webb's name. She answered on the second ring. Marcus. Hannah. His voice was something complicated. Relief and confusion, and the particular emotion of a person who has been holding a lot of things tightly and is now finally releasing some of them. I've been trying to reach you since they told me you were... There's an agent here at the hospital and I don't... Can you just tell me you're okay? I'm okay, she said. I'm okay, Marcus. Are you at the hospital right now? Yeah, third floor. Anna, there are federal agents at the administrator's office. Security just told us all to stay in our units. What is happening? She looked at Voss. Voss gave her a small nod. I can't tell you everything right now, Hannah said, but I need you to do something for me. The agent who's there with you, do exactly what they tell you. Don't argue with anyone from administration today. Don't let anyone take you somewhere without letting the agent know first. Silence. And then Marcus quietly, how long have you known about this? She closed her eyes for 1 second. A while. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, could hear the hospital sounds around him, the intercom and the footsteps, and the machinery of a place that never stopped running, even when the people inside it were falling apart. Were you ever... He started and then stopped. Started again. Were you ever actually just a nurse on this floor? Or was it always... I was always a nurse on that floor, she said, and she meant it. Whatever else she had been doing, the patients had been real. The work had been real. She had never used the floor as cover without also doing the actual job, because the people who needed her care had nothing to do with what she was building in the background, and she had refused to let them pay for it. Okay, Marcus said, slowly. Okay, I'll explain everything, she said. When I can, I promise. She hung up. 5:48 p.m. The news had grown. What had started as a local station story was now spreading, picking up traction on social media, getting fragments of the truth mixed with the false narrative that had been seeded early in the morning. Hannah Mercer, nurse, arrested for theft. Unstable. Overstep. The words that Holloway had used in that corridor were being echoed in comment sections by people who had never met her and would never know what she had actually been doing. Voss put a laptop in front of her without comment. Hannah read the coverage. She read the comment sections. She sat with the particular kind of quiet that comes when you have done something real and true and difficult, and are watching a version of it that bears your name, but looks nothing like what actually happened, spread through the world at a speed that truth rarely matches. She made her decision. The statement tonight, she said, I want my role in it. Full. Voss looked at her. You understand what that means? Yes. The network, the people not yet arrested, they'll know who you are. They already know who I am, Hannah said. Garner was in that room with me this morning. They've known for at least several hours. The question is whether the public knows what I actually did before the story they're building gets any further ahead. She looked at Voss. I spent 9 months making sure the truth had a foundation. I'm not going to let a lie get taller than the building I put under it. Voss nodded. 6:59 p.m. The coordination call happened at 7. Voss put it on speaker so Hannah could hear. 4 field office supervisors, a deputy U.S. attorney, 2 federal prosecutors, a communication director for the Department of Justice. The scale of what was about to happen in 4 hours settled over the room like a physical weight. Raid teams confirmed, 7 locations, 61 primary targets. Simultaneous entry at 3:17 a.m., the same time Hannah had originally been watching from a precinct room while counting down to a wellness check. 12 of the 61 were in custody already, including Holloway and Garner. The remaining 49 were being monitored, their movements tracked, nothing triggered that might cause flight risk before the window. $60 million in fraudulent billing identified so far. Potential recovery of stolen medical supplies across 14 hospital systems. A network of protection that had been shielding corruption for federal oversight for 4 years, in 3 states, touching municipal police departments, hospital administrations, city governments, and, through Garner, a congressional oversight committee that was supposed to be the last check in the system. Hannah listened to all of it and thought about a billing code. A number slightly wrong on a claim form, 14 months ago. A number she had not scrolled past. 7:42 p.m. She was eating, actually eating, for the first time since the previous evening, when Torres came into the room with a look on her face that Hannah had learned to read in the last 12 hours. Something new, something significant. The encrypted files on the drive, Torres said, the layer we hadn't fully processed yet. Our tech team finished an hour ago. She sat down. There's a name in there, a name that doesn't match any of the targets we've been building toward, a name we didn't have before today. Hannah set down her fork. Who? Torres said the name. Hannah went completely still. It was someone she knew. Not from the investigation, not from the hospital or the precinct or any of the institutional structures she had been mapping for 9 months. It was someone she knew personally, someone she had trusted during the operation, someone who had been, or she had believed had been, on the right side of the line she had spent 9 months standing at the edge of. The betrayal hit her somewhere below the chest, in that part of the body where things land when they are not just information, but actual loss. She sat with it for 5 seconds, exactly 5. Then she said, "Are you sure?" "The financial record is direct," Torres said. "A payment, 14 months ago, for information. The information matches the timing of a security incident we had in this operation that we never fully explained." Torres kept her eyes on Hannah. 14 months ago, someone told them you'd been noticed. Someone told them to watch you, and they did. And then they decided to pull you closer instead of push you out, because having you inside was more useful to them than shutting you down. 14 months ago, the beginning, before she had agreed to Voss's ask, before the flash drive, before any of it, she had been exposed before the operation even started. And someone had decided to use that exposure as a tool. The name Torres had said sat in the middle of her mind like something with mass. She had trusted that person. She had let that person inside the edges of what she was doing. Not fully, not with all the details, but enough. Enough that the information could have been weaponized. Enough that 14 months of her work had been conducted with a crack in the foundation she hadn't known was there. She thought about the 9 months, the careful accumulation of evidence, the nights she hadn't slept, the 2 times she had flagged irregularities internally and watched them disappear. Had those disappearances been random, institutional inertia, or had they been steered? Had someone been watching the file she was building and quietly redirecting it away from certain names? Had the evidence she had gathered been shaped, not falsified but framed, by someone who knew what she was collecting and made sure certain corners of the picture stayed dark? She looked at Torres. "How much does this compromise the case?" Torres was quiet for a moment. "The core case, the fraud, the supply theft, the local network, it holds. Your evidence is corroborated by independent sources. The financial records are clean." She paused. "But there are 2 targets in the secondary network whose files are thin. Thinner than they should be given the timeline. And now we know why. 2 people who should have been in the indictment and might not be. Because someone had made sure Hannah's light didn't reach that far." "I want the name escalated to Voss immediately," Hannah said. "She already has it," Torres said. "That's why she sent me." 8:51 p.m. Voss came in 20 minutes later. She sat across from Hannah, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a kind of shared acknowledgement in the silence, both of them understanding that what had just been discovered was not just a betrayal in the personal sense, but a structural failure in the operational sense, and that the response to it had to be both things at once. "I'm sorry," Voss said. "Don't be," Hannah said. "Tell me what we can do." "The name is being flagged as a new target. Emergency warrant application is already in motion. The 2 thin files, our team is working them right now with the information we have. There's enough for inclusion in tonight's operation." "You're sure?" "We'll have confirmation before midnight." Hannah nodded. She put her hands flat on the table again. That gesture, the one she kept returning to without meaning to, the steadying of palms against a hard surface when everything around her was moving too fast. She looked at her hands, thought about the 9 months, thought about the crack in the foundation she had been building on, and then she thought about what had been built on top of it anyway. 61 names, 7 cities, $60 million, a congressman on the Judiciary Committee, a network that had run for 4 years and was going to stop running tonight. The crack hadn't brought it down. She had built it anyway, even standing on damaged ground, and it had held. "What time is it?" she asked. 8:53, Voss said. 6 hours and 24 minutes until 3:17. Hannah looked at Voss. "Then we have work to do." The work Voss had referenced was not abstract. Between 9 p.m. and midnight, Hannah sat in a back room with Caldwell and Torres and 2 analysts she had never met, going through every piece of her 9 months, record by record, cross-referencing what she remembered against what the files contained, looking for the fingerprints of interference, looking for the places where the light had been quietly redirected. It was the most focused 3 hours she had spent in the entire operation, and also the most painful, because every gap she found, every moment where a trail went slightly sideways or a name appeared one fewer time than it should have, had a human face attached to it now. A face she knew, a face she had trusted. She didn't say the name out loud again. She just worked. At 9:47, Torres flagged something, a document Hannah had collected in month 4, an internal hospital communication about a vendor contract, something she had included because the financial routing looked irregular. The document was in the file, but one page was missing. Not removed visibly, not redacted, just absent, the way a page goes missing when someone knows exactly which page to take and takes only that one, leaving everything else intact enough that a quick review wouldn't catch it. That page, Hannah said, it had a signature, a specific authorization signature for a payment that shouldn't have existed. "Whose signature?" Caldwell asked. She told him. He wrote it down, didn't react, but the quality of his stillness told her it mattered. 10:12 p.m., the emergency warrant came through at 10:23. Voss walked into the room holding her phone, and she didn't say anything. She just turned the screen toward Hannah so Hannah could read it. The name, the charge, conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, aiding and abetting fraud. The same categories of crime Hannah had been building cases against for 9 months, now applied to someone who had been sitting on the same side of the room. Hannah read it twice. Then she handed the phone back. "Is the arrest happening tonight?" she asked. "Simultaneous with the others," Voss said. 3:17. "We're not moving early because we don't want any part of this network knowing the warrant exists before the window. They'll know they're a target. Probably, but knowing and running are 2 different things. We have eyes on them right now." Hannah nodded and turned back to the files. There was nothing else to do with the feeling except put it somewhere it wouldn't interfere with the work. She had gotten very good at that over 9 months. It was not a skill she was proud of. It was a skill she had needed. 10:51 p.m. The room had been quiet for almost 40 minutes, the particular productive quiet of people doing detailed work, when Caldwell looked up from his laptop and said, "Mercer, the 2 thin files Torres mentioned earlier. We have something." She moved around the table to look at his screen. The analyst beside him walked her through it. In the gap created by the missing page and the redirected trail, there had been a secondary thread that the person who interfered had apparently not noticed or had not considered significant enough to address. A payment routed through a vendor account in month 7 of Hannah's collection period. Small amount, unremarkable on its own, but connected through 2 intermediate accounts that the financial analyst had spent the last 90 minutes tracing to both of the thin file targets. It was thin, thinner than anyone wanted, but it was there. "Is it enough?" Hannah asked. The analyst looked at Caldwell. For inclusion in the operation tonight, yes. For conviction at trial, that depends on what physical evidence the raid teams recover. Then the raid teams need to know exactly what they're looking for and where, she said. Already being transmitted, Caldwell said. 11:17 p.m. She stepped outside for the first time in hours. The air was cold and she stood in it for a few minutes without moving, letting her body adjust to the temperature, letting her mind rest from the relentless forward motion of the last 18 hours. She had been awake for 33 hours. She was functioning, but she was functioning the way a machine functions when it has been running past its designed operating window. Technically fine, but accumulating a cost that would have to be paid later. She heard footsteps behind her and knew from the weight of them that it was Voss. They stood together for a moment without speaking. "You doing okay?" Voss asked. "Honestly?" "Honestly," Hannah breathed out. "The betrayal, the person in those files. I keep trying to put it somewhere it doesn't affect my judgment, and it keeps coming back." She was quiet for a second. "Not because of what it means for me personally, because of the people it might have protected. The two thin files, if that interference had been more complete, if they had been better at hiding the tracks, those two people would have kept walking, and people would have kept getting hurt by what they were part of." Voss was quiet beside her. "That's the part I can't put down," Hannah said. "Not the personal betrayal, the consequence of it." "You found it," Voss said. "That's the fact of it. You found it, the analyst found the thread, and it's in the operation tonight. The consequence you're describing, it didn't happen. This time. This time is what we have." Hannah looked at the dark space in front of her. "Yeah," she said. "This time is what we have." 11:44 p.m. Inside, the energy had shifted. The careful, methodical atmosphere of the debrief and analysis phase was giving way to something else. A pre-operational tension. The kind Hannah recognized from years in situations where what came before was preparation and what came next was irreversible. People were moving with more purpose. Voices were lower and more specific. The communication channels were active, and she could hear, through an open door, fragments of coordination between teams she couldn't see. Torres found her in the corridor. "The DOJ statement is finalized. It goes out at 3:17, simultaneous with the operation. Your name, your role, the nature of the evidence, it's all in there." She handed Hannah a single printed page. "They want your approval on the language before it releases." Hannah read it standing in the corridor. It was accurate. More than accurate, it was precise in a way that mattered to her. The difference between a statement that described what she had done and a statement that understood why. It named her as a trauma nurse and a former combat medic. It described the 9 months of evidence collection. It referenced the arrest. Holloway's name was in there. The charges against him were in there. The violation of her counsel rights was in there. And it put all of it in the context of what it had produced. Not a story about one nurse in one town. A story about what one person's refusal to look away had uncovered. She handed it back to Torres. "It's good," she said. 12:22 a.m. She called her sister. She had been putting it off for reasons she understood, without fully being able to articulate them. Her sister, Claire, 3 years younger, living in Portland with 2 kids, and a life that had no connection to any of what Hannah had been doing, was the person in the world who would be most affected by seeing Hannah's name attached to something this large and this public. Not because Claire would be proud, not because she wouldn't be, but because Claire had spent years carrying a particular kind of worry about Hannah that was specifically calibrated to the way Hannah lived. The silence, the distance, the way she chose hard things and carried them alone. The phone rang twice. "Hannah," Claire's voice was already awake, which meant she had been up waiting, which meant the local news story had already reached Portland. "Hey," Hannah said, "what is happening? I saw your name on. There was an arrest report, and then someone shared a news clip, and I've been trying to call you for—" "I know, I'm sorry, I couldn't call before now." A long breath. Are you okay? I'm okay. Are you actually okay, or are you saying you're okay? Hannah almost smiled. Both. I'm going to be on the news tonight. Real news, not the whatever you saw earlier. It's going to be a lot. I need you to not watch it alone, okay? I need you to have someone with you. Silence. And then Claire, quiet and careful. How long has this been happening? A while. A while like a few weeks or 9 months. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences of the night. It was the silence of a person absorbing something that changed the shape of a long period of time they thought they already understood. All those check-in calls. All the times Hannah had sounded tired and attributed it to work. All the times Claire had asked how things were, and Hannah had said, "Fine, things are fine." "You should have told me," Claire said, very quietly. "I couldn't. I know you couldn't, but you should have." A pause. "I would have. I don't know what I would have done, but I would have done something." "That's exactly why," Hannah said. And she meant it gently. She meant it as the truth it was, not as a deflection. Claire would have done something. And doing something would have created a thread, a connection, a point of vulnerability in a structure Hannah had needed to be tight. The people I was working against, they threatened people around me. Near the end, I couldn't have given them a thread to pull. Another silence. "They threatened you." "Not directly, it doesn't matter now." "It matters to me," Claire said, and her voice had something in it that was the oldest version of their relationship. The younger sister who had always been fiercer on Hannah's behalf than Hannah was on her own. "It matters a lot to me, actually." "I know," Hannah said. "I'll explain everything. When this is over and I can sit with you properly, I'll explain all of it." "You'd better." A shaky breath. "I'm calling David. We're watching together." "Good," Hannah said. "I love you. I love you. Be careful." She hung up and stood in the corridor and let herself feel that one. The weight of all the phone calls she hadn't been able to make, all the ordinary connections she had maintained at surface level while keeping everything real happening underneath. 9 months of that. It had been necessary. It had also been a cost. And the cost had a face. And the face was her sister's voice saying, "I would have done something." 1:11 a.m., 2 hours and 6 minutes. The field office was fully operational now. Every person in it moving through the final preparation phase with the concentrated energy of people who had been building toward a specific moment and could feel the moment becoming real. Voss was on a coordination call with 3 other field supervisors. Caldwell was reviewing warrant documentation with a paralegal. Torres was on her phone, moving fast between rooms. Hannah sat with the analyst team, reviewing the raid briefings for each of the 7 locations. She wasn't officially part of the operational command. Her role had been evidence collection, and that phase was complete. But the analysts had been using her as a resource for context that files alone couldn't provide, and she had been giving it freely because knowing what they were walking into mattered for the safety of people she had worked alongside for 9 months at a distance. "The precinct," one of the analysts said. "Holloway is already in custody, but there are 4 other officers in the indictment who are currently on shift. What's your read on resistance potential?" She thought about the 4 names. She had files on all of them. She knew their behavior patterns the way she had come to know the behavior patterns of everyone in the network, not from personal relationship, but from months of careful observation, reading people through their actions and their choices, and the specific way they responded to pressure. "2 of them will comply immediately," she said. "They've been follower profiles the whole time. They did what they did because the system around them made it easy and profitable, not from conviction. The other 2," she paused. "One of them has a family and has been showing signs of anxiety for the last few weeks. I think he already knew something was coming. He'll be more volatile, but not resistant. The 4th one," she hesitated, "he's the one you need to be careful with. He's been in Holloway's orbit for 8 years, and he's the kind of person whose identity is fully fused to the structure he's been part of. When that structure falls, people like that don't always process it safely, the analyst wrote. Looked up. That's extremely specific. That's 9 months of watching people, Hannah said. 1:53 a.m. Voss came in and sat beside her, and they were quiet together for a moment, with the low noise of the building around them. How are you feeling about tonight? Voss asked. Ready, Hannah said. There's going to be a media situation. After the statement releases, your phone is going to... I know. I'd recommend keeping it off until morning. Let the story establish itself before you engage with any of it. Hannah nodded. She had already thought about this. The first version of any story is the version that gets the deepest roots. And the story that had been running since early morning, the unstable nurse, the theft, the arrest, had roots. The truth would displace it, but not without a fight. And the fight would happen in comment sections and news segments, and the kind of semi-public conversation that had no regard for what was actually true, as long as what was interesting was available. She had decided, somewhere between 11 p.m. and midnight, that she was not going to spend energy trying to manage that. She was going to do what she had always done, put the real thing in front of people and let it be what it was, and trust that the people who were willing to look at it clearly would see what was there. 2:31 a.m., 46 minutes. The room where she had spent the last portion of the evening had gone quieter as people moved into position. She was aware from the fragments of communication she could hear that the raid teams were staged at their respective locations, that the simultaneous entry protocol was confirmed, that the communication channels were locked and verified. Then Voss's radio crackled, not with a voice, with a tone. A specific tone that Hannah had been briefed on months ago and had never actually heard in real time until now. Contact lost on a secondary target. She was on her feet before she was aware of having stood up. Voss was already talking into the radio. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. Torres came from another direction, moving fast. Which target? Hannah said. Voss held up one hand, not a dismissal, a hold on. She was listening to the radio. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was receiving information she needed to process before she could act on it. The micro-expressions cycling through faster than most people could follow. Then she lowered the radio and looked at Hannah. Garner, she said, he's not at the holding facility. The room went cold. What do you mean he's not? Hannah started. He was processed and held at the federal facility in Seton, standard custody. But the agent doing the 2 a.m. welfare check, his cell is empty. Processed out 40 minutes ago. Someone signed the release. Who signed it? That's what we're determining right now. Hannah stood completely still, and her mind worked through it at a speed that felt almost separate from her body. Garner was out. A congressman who had been in that precinct building at 5 in the morning, threatening a federal witness, who had been arrested and processed and held, was out of federal custody 40 minutes before the largest coordinated raid of the operation. He had gotten out, which meant someone inside the facility had let him out, which meant the network extended somewhere she and 9 months of evidence collection and every analyst in this building had not mapped. And if Garner was out, if he had 40 minutes, he had already made calls. He had already activated whatever emergency protocols a man of his position and his connections could activate. He had already started moving pieces. Flight risk? Caldwell said. He has resources, Voss said. International contacts through his committee work. If he reaches... He can't have gotten far, Torres said. 40 minutes from Seton. Seton is 45 minutes from the regional airport, Hannah said. Every head in the room turned toward her. She held Voss's gaze. He has a standing travel authorization through his committee role. TSA pre-check. He could move through that airport in under 15 minutes. Voss was already on the radio. 2:39 a.m. The next 12 minutes were the most suspended of the entire night. A kind of concentrated collective holding of breath that Hannah felt physically, The way you feel the moment before a storm delivers on everything it promised. She stood in the room and watched the people around her do their jobs at a speed that was almost beautiful in its efficiency. The whole machine of the operation pivoting toward a new contingency without losing the main thread. The airport notification went out at 2:41. TSA hold. Voss on with the airport directly. Caldwell coordinating with local law enforcement through federal channels. Torres pulling Garner's known associate contacts, looking for vehicles, looking for anyone he might have called. At 2:47, one of the analysts looked up from his screen. Traffic camera, he said. Route 9 eastbound. Vehicle matching Garner's AIDS registration. 8 minutes from here. He's not going to the airport, Hannah said. Everyone looked at her. He's coming here, she said. Not from certainty, from instinct, from 9 months of building a picture of this man, from the way he had sat across from her in that precinct room and looked at her like a problem to be solved. He was a man who ran toward his problems when running away wasn't viable. He was a man who believed, had always believed, that he could talk his way out of anything if he could just get into the same room with the right people. He had done it for 4 years. He had done it in that room with her at 5 in the morning. He believed it was a skill he possessed, absolutely. He knows this is the field office, Hannah said. He's been on the Judiciary Committee for 4 years. He has access to federal infrastructure records. He's coming here to try to make a deal. Voss stared at her for 2 seconds. Then she turned to Caldwell. Lock down the building, external perimeter, and get me a team at the east entrance in the next 4 minutes. 2:53 a.m. They came through the east entrance at 2:58. Not with violence, with the particular, desperate, controlled energy of a man who knew the window was closing and was putting everything he had left into one final move. Garner came in with his aide, and a man Hannah didn't recognize who carried himself like private legal counsel, and they were stopped at the security checkpoint by 2 agents who had been there for exactly the last 5 minutes. Hannah was not in the entry area. She was in a corridor off the main room, able to hear without being visible, which was where Voss had placed her with a single quiet instruction: stay back. She heard Garner's voice, the public voice, the one she had heard in congressional hearings she had reviewed in research, the composed, authoritative cadence of a man who had spent decades being listened to in rooms full of powerful people. I need to speak with the supervising agent. I have information material to tonight's operation that has not been included in the current indictments. I am prepared to cooperate fully in exchange for... Sir, one of the agents at the checkpoint, steady, unmoved. You are currently the subject of an active federal warrant. You are in violation of the terms of your custodial release. I am going to need you to... I have a right to... Sir. Silence. And then Voss's voice, coming from the main room, moving toward the checkpoint with that unhurried certainty that was one of the most precisely calibrated things about her. Congressman Garner, I'm Patricia Voss, supervising agent on this operation. I understand you have something to say. A pause. I do. You'll say it in custody, Voss said, and your attorney can be present when you do. But you came to the wrong building if you thought you were going to walk in here and negotiate your way out of a federal indictment 40 minutes before the operation you helped create goes live. A beat. Take him. 3:04 a.m., 13 minutes. Hannah was still in the corridor when Voss found her. She looked, for the first time in the entire night, like something had released in her face. A tension so deep and so long-standing that its departure changed her features in a way that was almost like watching someone younger surface from underneath the professional exterior. He was going to offer names, Voss said. The other 2 people the thin files didn't fully reach. He was going to give them to us in exchange for protection. Hannah processed that. He knew about the gaps. He helped create them, which means he knew about the person in our files, which means the person in our files was his insurance, Hannah said. If things went wrong, he could offer that person as a trade. Come in, offer the names, protect himself, and let someone else take the full weight. That's our read, Voss said. And instead, he just gave you the confirmation that the gaps were intentional. Gave it to you voluntarily, in front of witnesses, trying to negotiate with it. Sometimes people outsmart themselves, Voss said. 3:17 a.m. She heard it through the building before she saw it. Not the physical action of it, which was happening across 7 locations simultaneously and was not visible from where she was standing, but the communication of it. The radio channels going live. The voices of raid team leaders confirming entry. 1 location, 2, 3. The disciplined, rapid-fire back and forth of people executing something that had been planned for months and was now becoming real in real time, across 3 states, in 7 places at once. Voss was in the center of the main room, with her headset on and her eyes moving across the screens that the analysts were monitoring. And she was calm the way deep water is calm. Not still, not without current, but steady at the surface. Hannah stood at the edge of the room and listened to it happen. Entry confirmed, location 1, 4 targets, no resistance. Entry confirmed, location 2, 2 targets secured. Location 3, a brief pause that lasted 3 seconds and felt like 30. 3 targets, 1 non-compliant, situation controlled. Location 4, 5 targets, all compliant. Location 5, the voice paused, and in the pause, Hannah felt the whole room tighten. Target 1 not present at primary location. Secondary address being checked now. Voss's head turned. Her eyes found one of the analysts. Which target? The analyst checked, looked up. Reyes, Financial Director, City Municipal Office. Hannah knew that name. She had more documentation on Reyes than almost any other target. Months of financial trail, communications, the specific routing of city funds into accounts that served the network. Reyes was not a volatile profile. Reyes was careful, methodical, the kind of person who planned for contingencies. Secondary address, Voss said into her headset. Move now. 3:29 a.m. The secondary address confirmed at 3:29. Reyes was there, bags packed, car running in the garage, phone in hand. The raid team had made the secondary location in 11 minutes, which was 7 minutes faster than anyone had expected, and the arrest had gone cleanly. 29 officials in custody across all 7 locations by 3:41 a.m. Anna heard the number when Torres said it aloud to Caldwell. 29. She let it settle. She had spent 9 months in a system that had felt, on the worst days, bottomless. A corruption so embedded and so protected that the distance between what she could see and what she could prove had sometimes felt like it would never close. 29. Torres looked at her across the room, and there was something in her face, not celebration, because this was not the kind of work that ended in celebration, but something quieter and more durable than that. Recognition, the acknowledgement of something real having been accomplished. Hannah nodded once. 3:52 a.m. Voss came to her with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, not the cold, forgotten kind from earlier in the night, and handed one over without fanfare. It's not done, Voss said. You know that. Trials, appeals. The 2 thin files still need more work before they're trial ready. The person in our files is in custody, but the case against them needs to be airtight. I know, Hannah said. In the media situation tomorrow, I know. And you personally are going to face... Voss stopped, looked at her. You know all of this. I know all of this, Hannah said. They drank their coffee. 60 million, Hannah said after a moment. That number, the money they identified. 63 as of tonight's seizures, Voss said. Probably higher once we process everything from the 7 locations. Hannah thought about the billing code, the small wrong number on a claim form, the things she had not scrolled past 14 months ago. $63 million that existed in the world as the accumulated theft of people who had trusted a system to be what it said it was. People who had needed medical care and had been billed for things that didn't happen. People who had filed complaints and been silenced. People who had worked in those institutions and watched things disappear and been told they were imagining it. She had not been imagining it. "I need to sleep," she said. "Yes," Voss said, "you do." But first, Hannah held her cup with both hands, felt the warmth of it against her palms, and looked at the room around her, the people who had been in motion for this entire endless night, and said, "Whatever happens after this, whatever the trials look like, whatever the media does, whatever comes next, tonight actually happened. They can't undo tonight." Voss looked at her. "No," she said, "they can't undo tonight." 4:07 a.m. Anna Mercer found a cot in a back room of a federal field office 40 miles from the town where she had spent the last 9 months building something she wasn't sure would ever be enough. And she lay down and she closed her eyes, and for the first time in 9 months, she fell asleep without counting anything at all. She slept for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Not because 4 hours was enough. It was not enough. But somewhere around 8:15 in the morning, her body made the decision that the debt had been partially serviced and pulled her back to the surface, whether she was ready or not. And she opened her eyes in the back room of the federal field office and lay still for exactly 30 seconds, letting the full weight of where she was and what had happened settle back into place, the way things settle after you have slept. Not lighter, but more organized, more possible to carry. She sat up, found her shoes, walked out into the corridor. The building was different in the morning. The pre-operational tension that had charged every room the previous night had been replaced by something else. Still busy, still purposeful, but with a different quality. The kind of busy that follows action rather than precedes it. People moving through aftermath rather than toward a target. Torres was at a desk in the main room, working through something on a laptop, and she looked up when Hannah appeared in the doorway. "Coffee's in the corner," Torres said. "Real coffee. Someone made an actual pot." "How long have you been awake?" Hannah asked. Torres looked at her. "I honestly don't know anymore." Hannah got the coffee. She stood with it and looked at the screens and absorbed the morning version of what was real. 29 arrests confirmed. 63 million in identified fraudulent activity. 7 simultaneous raid locations, all secured. The statement from the DOJ had gone out at 3:17 and had been running in news cycles for the last 5 hours. Her name was in every version of it. 8:31 a.m. Voss appeared at 8:31 looking like a person who had not slept at all and was operating on something that had moved past caffeine into a more fundamental form of determination. She sat across from Hannah with her own cup and a folder that she set on the table between them. "The media situation," she said, "is significant." Hannah nodded. She had anticipated significant. The DOJ statement corrected the narrative from yesterday morning's leak, but the original story had 6 hours of circulation before the correction. There are outlets still running the early version alongside the new information, framing it as conflicting accounts. 2 cable networks are calling it a government overreach story, focusing on the arrest at the hospital rather than on what the arrest was trying to suppress. She paused. And there are people, specifically people connected to Garner's political network, who are on those networks this morning describing you as a partisan operative. Hannah looked at her over her coffee. A partisan operative. That's the language they're using, yes. She let that sit for a moment. The specific absurdity of it, 9 months of actual work, an actual flash drive, 29 actual arrests, 63 million in actual stolen money, being reframed in real time as political performance by people whose only stake in the framing was protecting the parts of the network not yet reached. "What do they need from me?" she asked. "Nothing you're obligated to give," Voss said. "The case stands on what it is. You don't have to say a word publicly. But Voss was quiet for a second. The two thin files, the targets that are in the indictment but whose cases are most dependent on physical evidence, recovered in the raids. Their attorneys are already moving. They filed preliminary motions at 7 a.m. One of them is arguing that the entirety of the evidence chain is compromised because of the identified informant in our operation, the person in our files. They're saying the operation itself was tainted from the start. Hannah set down her cup. This was the move she had not fully anticipated, and she should have. She had been so focused on the operational outcome, the arrests, the evidence, the raids, that she had not spent enough time looking past it to what skilled defense attorneys would do the moment the dust settled. And what they would do was look for the crack in the foundation that she had built on anyway, the crack she had found at 8:51 p.m. the previous night in a folder on an analyst's laptop. They had found it too. In 7 hours of post-arrest legal maneuvering, they had found it. Is the argument viable? She asked. Our prosecutors say no. The core evidence is independently corroborated. The informant's interference was limited to a specific subset of files, and the flash drive you handed over was secured before we had any knowledge of the informant's role. Voss held her gaze. But viable and damaging are two different things. Even an argument that doesn't win can create enough noise to complicate a jury, delay a trial, give the remaining network time to continue moving money and people. 9:07 a.m. Hannah stood up. She walked to the window, not to look out, just to move, to let her body engage with the thinking her mind was doing. She had been sitting for most of the last 20 hours, and her body needed motion the way her mind needed problems to work on. I want to testify, she said. You will testify, Voss said. Eventually, at trial, when, before that, I want to make a public statement, not through the DOJ, not filtered through a press office, my own statement, my own words. She turned around. The people who are trying to muddy this case are using the informant issue as a structural argument. They're saying the operation was compromised. I can address that directly. I can explain publicly that I found the interference, that I reported it, that the core evidence predates and exists independently of any compromise. She paused. And I can do it in a way that a jury pool hears before the defense attorneys have finished building their narrative. Voss looked at her for a long moment. Hannah, you understand that going public at this level, not as a named witness in a DOJ statement, but as a person speaking directly, changes things for you permanently. You cannot unring that bell. The bell is already rung, Hannah said. My name has been on television for 6 hours. There is no version of quiet left for me. She looked at Voss steadily. I chose this. I chose it 14 months ago when I didn't scroll past a billing code. I'm not going to let that choice become something that gets picked apart and diluted because I'm afraid of cameras. 9:22 a.m. She called Marcus while the communication team was setting up. She needed to hear his voice, and she needed to tell him directly, not through a federal intermediary, not through a morning news cycle, what was about to happen. He answered on the first ring. I saw the statement, he said immediately, like he had been holding it since 3:17 and was finally getting to put it down. I saw your name, the whole thing, the 9 months, the FBI. He stopped, started again. Hannah, you were doing this the entire time we were working together. Yes, she said. The nights you came in exhausted, the times I thought you were burning out. I kept watching you and thinking I should do something, and I didn't know what to do. Marcus, she kept her voice steady, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You showed up and you did your job, and you were decent to me on a lot of days when decent was more important than you knew. A silence, then his voice, quieter. The administrator. They sent an email this morning, official hospital communication, saying your nursing license is under review pending the investigation. Hannah closed her eyes for 1 second. She had expected this. She had known it was coming. The hospital administration, what remained of it after the arrests of the executives named in the indictment, was an institution in survival mode. And institutions in survival mode protect themselves by creating distance from anything that might attach liability to them. Hannah Mercer, who had spent 9 years on their payroll while secretly collecting evidence of their crimes, was the maximum liability. "I know," she said. "It's wrong," Marcus said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man working hard to stay measured. "It's completely wrong. You saved this hospital. You saved patients who had no idea what was happening to their care. And they're going to do what they're going to do," Hannah said. "And I'm going to do what I'm going to do, which right now is go make a statement to a camera." A pause. "Can I watch?" "Turn on any major news channel in about an hour," she said. "It'll be there." 9:58 a.m. The communication team had arranged it cleanly. A conference room, a standing position, no podium, which was her preference because she had always found podiums to be a way of creating distance between a person and the reality they were trying to communicate. She wanted no distance. She wanted every person watching to be able to see her face and know she was a real human being speaking the actual truth about actual things that had actually happened. Voss stood off to the side. Torres was further back near the door. Caldwell was not in the room, which she took as a deliberate courtesy. This was her space, her moment, and the people who had built this operation alongside her were giving it to her fully. She thought about what she wanted to say and what she did not want to say. She did not want to perform anything. She had been performing neutral, calm, operational for 9 months, and the only antidote she knew to that kind of sustained performance was complete directness. She was going to say exactly what was true in the plainest language she had. The camera went live at 10:04. She looked into it and said, "My name is Hannah Mercer. I'm a trauma nurse. I spent 9 months as an embedded federal witness in an investigation into corruption that affected patients, hospital staff, and the public in ways that were real and serious. I want to address something that's being said this morning about whether this investigation was compromised." She paused for exactly one breath. "There was a source inside the operation who was providing information to the network we were investigating. I found evidence of that at 8:51 p.m. last night. I reported it immediately. It was addressed before the operation executed, and the core evidence I collected, 9 months of financial records, communications, billing irregularities, and supply chain fraud, is independently corroborated and was secured well before any interference could have affected it." She kept her voice level and her eyes on the camera. "I want to be clear about something. The people who are arguing this morning that the operation was tainted, they know the evidence is real. They were there when it was real. Several of them made decisions in real time to try to stop it from being used. They failed. And the argument they are making today is not a legal argument about truth. It is an argument about delay, about confusion, about buying time." She paused again. "It won't work. The truth of what we found is in the record. 29 people were arrested last night because of what is in that record. And I am willing to stand in front of any court in this country and testify to every single piece of it." She stopped. The camera stayed on her. And then she said the last thing. The thing she had not fully planned to say, but that came from somewhere under the prepared words. From the part of her that was not an operative or a witness or a nurse, but just a person who had chosen, 14 months ago, to not scroll past something small and wrong. "I didn't do this because I wanted to be here. I didn't do this for recognition or because I had a personal score to settle. I did it because I was standing inside a system that was hurting people. And I could not look away from that. That's the only reason. It's a simple reason. But simple reasons can hold a lot of weight when you decide to commit to them." 10:14 a.m. She stepped back from the camera and the room was quiet for 3 seconds before Voss said, to no one in particular, "That's going to run everywhere." She was right. 10:47 a.m. Within 30 minutes of the statement, the framing had begun to shift. Not universally. Nothing shifts universally in the current media environment, where every story lives simultaneously in multiple contradictory versions across fragmented channels. But the major outlets were running the full statement. Her actual words, in her actual voice, were available to anyone who wanted to see them. The original false narrative, the unstable nurse, the theft, the arrest that was meant to be a silencing, was now being actively corrected not by a government press release, but by a human face and a human voice saying, in plain language, what was true. The defense attorney's preliminary motions were still in process. The license review at the hospital was still in process. The world was not suddenly simple or resolved, but the momentum had changed. Hannah felt it change. She could not have explained how she could feel a momentum shift. It was not a physical thing. But after 9 months of operating in a system she could not be visible in, of building something she could not speak about, of maintaining a surface calm over a subsurface truth, there was something profoundly different about standing in a room and saying the real thing and watching it go out into the world as itself. Unmediated, unfiltered, just the truth, moving at the speed of the network, competing for space against the lie. She sat down in a chair in the corridor and breathed. 11:23 a.m. The call she did not expect came at 11:23. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer it. Then something, instinct, the part of her that had learned to pay attention to things she couldn't fully explain, made her pick up. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, careful in the way people are careful when they have thought a long time about whether to make a particular call. "Ms. Mercer, my name is Evelyn Cross. You don't know me. My daughter was a patient at Ridgewood Falls Memorial 18 months ago. She filed a complaint about her care, about medications she didn't receive and was billed for. The complaint was dismissed. She was told she was confused." A pause. "I watched your statement this morning. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to decide whether to call this number, which I found through the DOJ press contact." Another pause. "I just want to say, my daughter believed something was wrong. She wasn't confused. And for 18 months, she's been carrying the weight of being told she was." The voice steadied. "What you did, what you said this morning, it means she wasn't wrong. It means she was right all along. And I needed someone to know that that matters." Hannah sat with the phone against her ear and felt something move through her that had no clean name. Not triumph, not relief. Something more fundamental than either of those. The specific feeling of contact between the reason you did something and the evidence that the reason was real. The billing code she had not scrolled past had a name. The name was Evelyn Cross's daughter. And there were more names. There had always been more names. That was the whole point. "Thank you for calling," Hannah said. Her voice was steady. "Please tell your daughter she was right. Write it down if you have to. She was right." Evelyn Cross said, "Thank you," and the line went quiet. 12:09 p.m. The hospital's nursing board reached out through official channels at 12:09. Not about the license review, about testimony. They wanted a formal interview with Hannah as part of an internal investigation they were initiating into the administrative practices that the federal case had exposed. They were, the communication read, in the process of reviewing all decisions made by the executive team currently named in the federal indictment, including disciplinary actions taken against staff who may have flagged irregularities. It was the first institutional movement toward accountability that came from inside the hospital itself rather than from outside it. Hannah read the communication twice, handed it to Torres, who was still nearby. "This is the hospital asking you to help them clean their own house," Torres said. "Yes," Hannah said. "You don't have to do that. After what they did this morning, the license review." The people who did that this morning are either in custody or they're going to be replaced by people who aren't, Hannah said. The hospital itself, the institution, the staff, the patients who still need care there, they didn't do anything. I'm not going to punish a building. She looked at Torres. Set up the interview. 1:15 p.m. Voss came to her in the early afternoon with the update on the person whose name Torres had said the previous night. The name that had landed like something with weight and stayed there. The arrest had happened at 3:17 along with the others. Booking confirmed. Charges filed. And now, at 1:15 in the afternoon, through their attorney, they were asking to speak with Hannah directly. She stared at Voss when Voss said this. They want to speak to me. That's what the attorney communicated. Why? Voss was quiet for a moment. The attorney didn't specify, but given the charge, conspiracy to obstruct, and the evidence we have, my read is that they want to explain themselves, not in a legal sense, personally. Hannah stood completely still. She thought about the 9 months. She thought about the crack in the foundation she had been building on. She thought about the 2 thin files and the missing page and the 14 months ago payment that had been the beginning of a compromise she hadn't known was happening underneath everything she was building. She thought about what she wanted. No, she said. Voss waited. Not because I can't, Hannah said, because there's nothing they can say that changes the facts of what they did. And I'm not going to sit in a room and receive an explanation that is really an attempt to make themselves feel better about a choice they made deliberately. She looked at Voss. If they want to help the case, they can speak to the prosecutors. That door is open, but they don't get a conversation with me. Voss nodded. No argument, no pressure, just the acknowledgement of a boundary being set and held. 2:44 p.m. The license review notification from the hospital board came in 2 hours and 35 minutes after the first communication. It was brief. The review was being suspended pending outcome of the federal investigation and an internal audit of the administrative processes that had generated the complaint against Hannah in the first place. Torres read it over her shoulder and said simply, "There it is." It was not an exoneration. It was a suspension of process, the institution protecting itself from a different direction now, no longer from Hannah, but from the liability of being seen to punish a federal witness for whistleblowing. But it was movement. It was the beginning of the system reconsidering itself, however awkwardly and however self-interestedly. Hannah filed it in the same mental space as everything else that was in motion. Not finished, not resolved, but real. 3:51 p.m. Her sister Claire called at 3:51. They talked for 47 minutes. Hannah told her everything, or as much of everything as she was legally able to say, which was more than she had been able to say before, and more than enough for Claire to understand the full shape of what the last 9 months had actually been. She talked and Claire listened, and occasionally made sounds that were not words, but communicated specific things. Shock, recognition, the particular silence of a person recalibrating their understanding of a time they thought they already knew. When Hannah finished, Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what Dad used to say? When we were kids and something was unfair and we'd ask him why nobody did anything?" Hannah remembered. She had not thought about it in years, but she remembered the exact phrasing, the exact cadence of it, the specific way their father had looked when he said it. Not cynical, never cynical, despite everything he had seen in his own life. He said, "Somebody always does something," Hannah said. "You just don't always hear about it." "Yeah," Claire said, softly. "I'm hearing about it now." 5:18 p.m. The first major feature story ran at 5:18. Not a cable segment, not a brief update, but a full investigative piece from a national outlet that had spent the day pulling together the complete picture. The arrest, the 9 months, the flash drive, the precinct, the federal operation, the 29 arrests, 63 million, 7 cities, and at the center of it, a trauma nurse from Ridgewood Falls who had seen a number slightly wrong on a billing form and had decided, without knowing exactly where it would lead or what it would cost, that she could not scroll past it. Hannah read the piece in the field office at 5:18. She read it the way she had read her own files, carefully, checking accuracy, noting what was right and what was slightly off and what was missing. Most of it was right. Some of it framed things in ways that emphasized the dramatic at the expense of the precise. One line stopped her. It read, "Mercer has declined to call herself a hero." She had not declined anything. No one had asked. But she looked at the sentence and thought about it and decided that even as an assumption, it was accurate. She had no interest in the word. The word was a container that people put other people in when they wanted to simplify something complex, when they wanted a single figure to carry a story that was really about a system and its failures, and the ordinary human decision to not accept those failures as permanent. She was not a container for a simplified story. She was a person who had made a choice and had lived with every consequence of that choice. The exhaustion, the fear, the double life, the betrayal, the attack on her reputation, the threat to her career, and was still living with the consequences because the consequences did not end with 29 arrests. They would continue through trials and appeals and institutional reviews and public narratives that would continue to be contested for years. She was not a hero. She was a person who had decided that looking away was not something she could do and had built everything else from that one decision. 7:02 p.m. She was still at the field office when Caldwell came to her with one last update of the day. The thin files, the two cases whose fragility had worried her since the previous night, had been significantly strengthened by physical evidence recovered in the raids. Documents, hard drives, two sets of financial records that had not been in her 9 months of collection, but had been sitting in filing cabinets and desk drawers in the offices that the raid teams had entered at 3:17. The defense argument about compromised evidence was going to have to contend with a mountain of independent physical corroboration. "The prosecutors feel good about both cases," Caldwell said. Hannah nodded. "They also asked me to tell you." He paused, and the pause was deliberate. The pause of a person delivering something that doesn't fit neatly into professional language. That in 22 years of federal prosecution work, the lead attorney on this case has never seen a single source evidence collection of this completeness and reliability. She wanted you to know that. Hannah looked at him. Let it land. Let it be real for exactly the amount of time it deserved, which was more than a second and less than a minute. "Tell her thank you," she said. 8:39 p.m. She left the field office at 8:39. Voss walked her out. The night air was cold and clear, and she stood in it and felt her own body as a distinct physical thing for the first time in what felt like days. Her feet on solid ground, her lungs filling with actual air, the specific gravity of a person who has been inside a pressurized situation for a long time, finally stepping back into ordinary atmosphere. "What happens now?" she asked. "Not operationally, personally." Voss looked at her. "Testimony when the trials move. That's months away, probably. The prosecutors will be in contact. Other than that," she paused, "you rebuild. However that looks for you. My job. You have options," Voss said carefully. "The DOJ has a victim witness advocacy unit that has expressed—" "I want to be a nurse," Hannah said. Voss nodded. "Then you'll be a nurse. The license review is suspended. When the hospital completes its internal audit, given what we know, there's no grounds for any adverse action against you. You'll be back on a floor." She paused. "Maybe not that floor, maybe not that hospital, but you'll be back." Hannah breathed. "I just want to take care of people," she said. And it was the simplest true thing she had said in the entire length of this long, unending, irreversible day. It was the reason she had become a nurse, and the reason she had become a combat medic, and the reason she had not scrolled past a billing code 14 months ago, and the reason she had spent 9 months building something in the dark, while keeping both her faces turned the right direction, and the reason she had sat in a metal chair in a processing room at 5 in the morning and held the line while people tried to break her. She just wanted to take care of people, and she had found, in the most complicated possible way, that taking care of people sometimes required doing things that looked nothing like care and felt nothing like safety and cost more than anyone who had never done it could fully understand. 9:01 p.m. She drove herself back toward Ridgewood Falls, not to the hospital, not yet, to her apartment, which she had not been in for more than 36 hours, which would feel like a strange and ordinary place after everything that had happened in the spaces between leaving it and returning to it. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She did not look at it. There would be time for the messages, the ones from people she knew, the ones from journalists, the ones from strangers who had seen her statement and felt moved to reach out. There would be time for all of it. There would be months of time for all of it. Right now she drove, and the road was dark and quiet, and in every city across 3 states, 29 people were in custody because she had not looked away. And $63 million was in the process of being traced back to the people it had been stolen from. And a network that had run for 4 years on the belief that it was untouchable had discovered, in a single coordinated night, that nothing built on stolen things is ever truly untouchable. She thought about Evelyn Cross. She thought about the daughter who had known something was wrong and had been told she was confused. She thought about every patient in every room of every hospital touched by what this network had done. The ones who never knew anything was wrong, the ones who suspected and said nothing because saying something felt impossible, the ones who said something and were silenced. She thought about a small wrong number on a billing form. She drove, and she knew, with the kind of certainty that lives below thought, in the place where the things you have paid for fully reside, that whatever came next, whatever the trials produced, whatever the media decided to make of her name, whatever shape her life took in the aftermath of 9 months, she could never fully explain to anyone who hadn't lived inside them. The decision had been right. Not comfortable, not safe, not without cost, not without betrayal and exhaustion and fear and the particular loneliness of carrying something too heavy to share, but right. And right, Hannah Mercer had learned, in every difficult place she had ever stood, from a field in a country most people would never find on a map to a processing room in a precinct at 5 in the morning. Right does not ask you whether you are ready. It asks only whether you are willing. She had been willing, and that had been enough to change everything.